why should you use Vim as a text editor or as an IDE? I've wanted to talk for some time about why I think it's an excellent idea to use Vim as your text editor, or depending on how you look at it, as your IDE. But I can't seem to settle down for a list of reasons. I can't seem to finish up the list, and there are just so many reasons. So I figured instead we'll do this. I'll do one video per reason, which means I don't actually have to settle for a final list. So welcome to the new series, Why Vim? First reason. And this is kind of almost like a meta argument. The reason is, when you are using Vim, you start to really appreciate the fact that things might be different. Let me state it in a different way. When you use Vim, you start to realize that the current state in software is not at all fixed. That the way we use programs is not at all fixed. And I don't mean fixed as in corrected, I mean fixed as in static. I mean things could be different. You know that classic and potentially false quote that Henry Ford supposedly said, that if I would have asked people what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse, right? To think outside the box, we have to really think outside the box. We can't just ask, because sometimes it's really hard to envision what a much better future would look like. I think the same is largely true for software. And when I say software now, because we're talking about Vim, I mainly refer to the tools that we are using as software developers. But of course, it's intimately connected to the software that we ship, because the ideas that we apply to the tools we use, we can of course also apply to the software that we ship. Let me put it in a different way. Instead of thinking about that things could be different, think of it this way. Sometimes I think it's healthy to ask yourself whether you think that we as an industry are making progress, or whether we are fooling ourselves into thinking that we are making progress. When you look at software that has been built a long time ago, such as Vim, or another great example is, for example, Bash. I specifically think of the concept of pipes. So when you look at old software like this, you start to realize that it's not necessarily obvious that we have always been making progress. Sometimes we have reached very interesting ideas, such as, for example, pipes, that has sort of been lost over time when we're moving into more, quotation marks, modern software. And in this series, of course, I think you'll find a lot of these sort of lost ideas when we talk about Vim. But for this first point, I simply wanted to mention that I think Vim is completely scattered with these amazing ideas that we've lost over time. Let me quickly touch one of these points. The word interoperability I find highly suitable for Vim. I mean that Vim, because of configurability, for example, plays very nice with a lot of other programs. If it is command line executable, well, Vim can play nicely with it. If you've tried out Vim, I'm thinking specifically of the map command. Without digging into details, you can map a keyboard shortcut to running a particular command. And because you can run any command, that means essentially that you can, in some sense, interoperate with just about any program. I'm not saying that Vim is without flaws. Vim has a bunch of things that makes it utterly frustrating and super confusing and, well, simply a pain to work with. But the point is, though, that amongst all of these things, we also have a bunch of concepts and ideas that I find super valuable, that makes you ask, wait, I don't know really when Vim was invented, to be honest, but at that time, if we had this kind of interoperability, how come we lost that interoperability over time? Doesn't that kind of feel like we went backwards rather than forwards? I'm not trying to be conservative. GUIs, for example, brought us a lot of other nice things. But with that came a bunch of trade-offs. And when you start to use Vim, you start to realize that some of these trade-offs were actually really costly. A catchphrase these days seems to be the idea of microservices, for example. So we put microservices on one end of the spectrum and monolithic apps on the other end of the spectrum, and then everyone's sort of mocking the whole idea of monolithic apps and say, well, of course we should build microservices, of course we should build small things that have confined responsibilities and compose them rather than trying to solve all of the problems at once and then throw all that whole solution into one specific project, right? in those discussions it seems that everyone's agreeing that microservices is a good idea and that large monolithic apps is a bad idea. But when it comes to discussions around software such as VIM, it doesn't really seem that people are in an agreement to the same extent. And that kind of confuses me, because it seems we're sort of touching on the same ground. Again, I'm not at all saying that VIM is perfect, but at least I think it's less monolithic than to pick something in the other extreme. We have, for example, Visual Studio, NetBeans, and Eclipse. Of course, in comparison to VIM, these are highly monolithic. So it's kind of the same discussion, just in a different context. So let me wrap this up. Again, first argument as to why you would want to use VIM. It makes you think about, it makes you reason about, it makes you reflect over the trade-offs we have made to get where we currently are, and in other words, what we have given up. So it makes you ask the question, how could things be? What could software development look like? What could software look like? What could software development tools look like? And generally, I think that's always a very important question to ask yourself. Or in other words, I think that would be some healthy skepticism that would be needed in sort of the land of software development. So that's it. I won't rant anymore today about VIM. But remember to subscribe to the channel, because there's more videos coming on VIM. More specifically on why you should use VIM. We'll dig into the techniques and the tricks and the things that you, when you've used VIM and you move to other environments, realize that it's very difficult to live without. But apart from that, if you're not interested in VIM, still be sure to subscribe, because there's lots of stuff on the channel on software architecture, design patterns, design principles, and us trying to learn from the greats that lived before us. Why make the same mistakes again when you can learn from the mistakes that other people have already made? Be sure to subscribe.